You ever notice how peace sometimes sounds like a setup? I learned that the hard way. My name is Pamela Anderson, and if you stay with me for the next few minutes, you'll understand how a quiet dinner turned into the last conversation my husband ever had with me. It was a Friday evening, the kind that hums with calm, the kind where you almost feel guilty for being happy. The dining room glowed with that soft amber light Timothy loved. Jazz played low, a saxophone drifting through our house like smoke. We were celebrating. He'd just secured an $8 million logistics contract, the final piece of the $25 million fortune he built from nothing. He'd always said this deal would be his last mountain, and that night it felt like we'd reached the top. We laughed through dinner, teasing each other about everything from his terrible dance moves to my habit of double-checking the oven even when it's off. For once, there were no board calls, no balance sheets, just us. After dessert, Timothy leaned back, loosened his tie, and smiled that quiet smile that meant something was coming. "Pam," he said, "I need you to do something for me. Transfer everything to your account. All of it." I blinked. "Everything? What do you mean, like the company accounts?" "All of it," he repeated softly. "The houses, the investments, every cent, just to be safe." The way he said it, calm, almost rehearsed, made the air tilt a little. I laughed, trying to shake off the unease. "Timothy, you sound like one of those doomsday planners. What's going on?" He reached across the table, fingers brushing mine. "It's not panic, sweetheart. It's protection. Some things have been shifting at work, that's all. You're the one I trust to keep it steady if anything happens." There was that word, if. He'd been careful since his mild stroke 5 years ago, so I didn't press. "All right," I said, finally forcing a smile. "First thing tomorrow, but only because you asked so sweetly." He chuckled. "Good. And now we don't talk business again tonight." "Promise." I nodded. He poured more wine, and we danced barefoot in the kitchen, like we used to when we were younger. The floor was cool beneath my feet, his hand warm against my back, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped just to let us breathe. Later, when I washed the dishes, I caught him staring at me, the kind of look that feels like someone memorizing you. "What?" I asked, laughing. He just smiled. "Nothing. You've always been the safe one." The next morning, I made the transfers exactly as he'd said, bank confirmations, signatures, everything legal and documented. When it was done, I texted him a photo of the completion receipt with a heart emoji. He replied with a thumbs up and wrote, "Perfect. See you tonight." That was Sunday morning. By Sunday night, my phone rang. "Mrs. Anderson?" The voice was steady, professional. "This is County General Hospital. Your husband's been brought in. You should come quickly." My coffee mug hit the counter before I realized I'd dropped it. It's strange how fast peace can turn into a question you can't stop asking. If you've ever had a day that started in laughter and ended in silence, tell me in the comments with just one word. Ready. Because that's what he told me to be. And I wasn't. The morning after that dinner felt normal, deceptively so. The sunlight poured through our kitchen windows like it always did, bouncing off the marble counters, glinting off the half-empty wine glasses from the night before. I remember thinking how alive the house felt. Nothing in that moment suggested that the clock had already started counting down. Saturday morning, Timothy left earlier than usual. He kissed me on the forehead, coffee in one hand, car keys in the other. "Don't forget to rest today," he said, that soft command he'd perfected over the years. I teased. You say that like you'll actually come home before dark. He grinned. This time I will. He didn't. I spent most of that day cleaning up, folding laundry, running errands, humming to myself while the news played in the background. The housekeeper, Miss Tilda, came by in the afternoon to drop off dry cleaning and fresh linens. She lingered near the doorway before leaving, looking hesitant. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "I came by the office earlier this morning to deliver those new ledgers. Mr. Anderson was on the phone. He sounded upset." I frowned. Upset about what? She hesitated, glancing at the floor. I didn't mean to overhear, but I heard him say, "You're not ready for that, Miles." I said no. Then the door shut. Miles, our only son. I tried to brush it off, telling myself business disagreements happen, especially between a father and a son working in the same company. Still, something about the way she said it, how her voice carried worry instead of gossip, stuck with me. "Thank you, Tilda," I told her. "I'll talk to him." But I didn't. That evening, I set the table for 2 out of habit, lighting a candle the way Timothy liked. By 8, I texted him a picture of his empty plate and wrote, "I'm eating your share." He replied with a simple, "Still at the office. Save me some pie." It was such a small, ordinary message, but I'd end up reading it over and over later like scripture. Sunday morning was quiet, too. The house smelled faintly of coffee and detergent. I walked past his study, noticing the drawer where we kept his watch was open. I closed it, assuming he'd just been in a rush. He called around noon, his voice steady but tired. "I'll be late tonight. Sweetheart. Don't wait up. Love you." I smiled. "Love you too. Drive safe." That was the last time I heard his voice. Hours later, I folded laundry in our bedroom. A slow rhythm that filled the silence. A storm was brewing outside, the kind that turns the air heavy before rain. I remember the clock ticking louder than usual and the smell of starch in the fabric softener. So sharp it almost burned. When the phone buzzed, I didn't think much of it. I wiped my hands and reached for it, expecting another text from Timothy. But it wasn't him. "Mrs. Anderson?" The voice was calm, but formal. "This is County General Hospital. Your husband's been brought in. You should come right away." The words didn't land at first. I stood frozen, holding the phone like I hadn't heard it correctly. "Brought in? What do you mean brought in?" The voice softened. He collapsed in his office. "Paramedics are working on him now." Something inside me sank deep like a floor giving way. I don't remember hanging up. I just remember keys in my hand. The front door swinging open, rain hitting my face before I'd even realized it was pouring. The drive blurred into lights and horns and prayers I couldn't remember forming. The only clear thought I had was that he'd told me not to wait up, so I hadn't. And now I'd give anything to have waited. When I reached the hospital doors, I didn't feel fear yet, just urgency, the kind of blind, cold focus that comes before the pain understands what it's supposed to do. I told myself it was exhaustion, dehydration, something simple, fixable. But somewhere under all that denial, a single thought began to whisper. It's been 48 hours since that dinner. And suddenly, safe didn't feel safe anymore. By the time I reached County General, the rain had turned to sheets. I don't remember the drive, just the sound of sirens somewhere ahead, and the feeling that the world had started closing in. The smell of disinfectant hit me before the sound of footsteps did. Hospitals always carry that strange silence. Half grief, half efficiency. The kind of quiet that makes you afraid to breathe, too loud. I remember clutching my purse to my chest as I rushed through those glass doors, rain still dripping from my hair. I didn't know what I was walking into. I just knew I had to get to him. At the reception, a nurse with kind eyes looked up. "Mrs. Anderson?" "Yes," I managed to say, barely above a whisper. She nodded gently. "Follow me, please." My shoes squeaked against the linoleum as we walked. The hallway lights were too bright, the air too cold. The nurse didn't speak, and I didn't ask. When she stopped outside a curtain-drawn room, she turned to me and said softly, "The doctor will explain everything." Inside, the machines were quiet. No beeping, no pulsing rhythm. Just a stillness that didn't belong in a room built to save people. Timothy lay there, pale and unmoving. A white sheet covered him from the chest down, and for a moment, I convinced myself I'd walked into the wrong room. My husband couldn't be still like that. He was all motion, hands that never stopped gesturing when he spoke, eyes that never stopped studying the world. "Mrs. Anderson," the doctor began, his voice a low blend of sympathy and professionalism, "your husband suffered cardiac arrest while at his office. Paramedics performed CPR for over 20 minutes before transport. We did everything we could. My brain refused to translate the words. Did everything we could. That phrase doesn't carry sound. It lands like weight. I sank into the chair beside the bed. My hands found his cold but familiar. I whispered his name once, then again, each time softer, as if repetition could bring warmth back into him. "Timothy, I'm here, love. It's me. I'm right here." No answer, just silence. The doctor excused himself, promising to return once I was ready for paperwork. I didn't look up. I just stared at the man who'd spent the last 30 years building safety around us, now leaving me with nothing but that one strange word, safe. After a while, a nurse came in quietly to adjust the monitors. She hesitated near the doorway before speaking. "Mrs. Anderson, for what it's worth, your husband wasn't alone when he collapsed." My eyes snapped up. "He wasn't." She shook her head. "Someone was already there when he went down. I think it was your son. Security mentioned he called for help before the paramedics arrived." "My son," I repeated, half in disbelief. "Miles was here." "Yes, ma'am." Her tone was careful. He seemed calm. Said he'd stay behind to give a statement to administration. Calm. That word didn't fit. Miles had always been emotional, especially about his father. I felt a flicker of confusion, but it was smothered quickly by the tidal wave of grief. I sat there another minute, tracing the lines of Timothy's hand with my thumb, memorizing the way his wedding band glinted under the fluorescent light. The ring had never left his finger, not once. The sound of the elevator opening at the end of the corridor barely registered at first. I only noticed when the nurse straightened slightly and murmured, "Family?" I turned. Miles was standing there, tall and composed, with Tanya beside him. For a second, I almost broke. Seeing my son felt like a lifeline in a sea of chaos. I stood automatically, arms open, tears blurring my vision. "Oh, Miles." But he didn't move toward me. "Mom," he said evenly, his tone flat, rehearsed. "We need to talk about Dad's accounts. Our lawyer's here to make sure everything's handled correctly." I froze, my arms still halfway outstretched. It took me a moment to realize what he'd just said. I blinked at him, expecting him to correct himself, to say something human, something grieving. But his expression didn't change. Tanya's eyes flickered briefly toward the bed, then back to him. Behind them, a man in a navy suit stepped off the elevator, holding a leather briefcase. He didn't speak, just nodded politely. My throat went dry. Miles, what are you talking about? He cleared his throat, emotionless. It's just procedure, Mom. We need to ensure the estate's protected. The world tilted slightly, like the air itself had shifted temperature. I could still hear the monitors clicking softly behind me, the smell of antiseptic thick in the room, the echo of the doctor's voice saying we did everything we could. Now, my son was here talking about accounts. For the first time since the phone call, I stopped crying because grief had been replaced by something colder, confusion. I lowered my arms slowly, staring at the people who were supposed to be my comfort. And in that sterile, humming silence, I realized I didn't know what this moment was anymore. Grief makes the world feel muffled, like sound travels through water. I remember standing in that hospital hallway, the overhead lights humming, the scent of antiseptic so thick it felt like it was pressing against my skin. Miles and Tanya stood in front of me, their clothes still crisp, their eyes too dry. Behind them was the man with the briefcase, the one Miles had called our lawyer. He must have followed them straight from the elevator, his expression already set, his presence too polished for a hospital corridor. He stepped forward first, voice low and respectful. Mrs. Anderson, please accept my condolences. This is an unimaginable loss. I nodded, words stuck somewhere between my heart and throat. I expected him to step back, to give me space, but he didn't. Instead, he opened that leather briefcase with a soft click and pulled out a file. If I could just have a moment of your time, he continued gently, we'll need some documentation regarding your husband's recent financial transfers. It'll help us make sure everything transitions smoothly through probate. I blinked. What? He smiled faintly, like he'd rehearsed this 100 times. Just to clarify, we're referring to the wire transfers executed within the past 72 hours. The accounts moved solely into your name. His words landed like stones. I felt the color drain from my face. You're here for that? Now, Miles stepped in, his tone clipped. Mom, please. We just want to make sure everything's handled the right way. The right way? I repeated. My voice cracked halfway through. Your father's gone, Miles. I'm barely standing upright. And It's not like that. Tanya interrupted softly, touching my arm. Her hand was warm, but her eyes were ice. We just need to protect what Dad built. You know how many people could take advantage of this situation right now? I stared at her. Who exactly is taking advantage? Tanya. She didn't flinch. That's why we have legal counsel. The lawyer cleared his throat politely, as if this were a meeting and not a moment soaked in grief. Mrs. Anderson, this isn't an accusation. We simply need verification of the transfers your husband requested. It's all standard procedure to prevent any complications with estate division. I couldn't even process half of what he was saying. My body was in the hospital, but my mind was still sitting at our dining table 2 nights ago, hearing Timothy's voice whisper, just to be safe. My lips parted, but no words came out. He took my silence as compliance. If you have access to any signed instructions or digital confirmations, He continued, "Please provide copies to our office within 24 hours. I can give you a contact card." That's when I found my voice. "My husband hasn't been dead an hour, and you're already counting his money." The lawyer froze, just briefly, but his face recovered faster than his conscience. "Mrs. Anderson, I assure you this is purely administrative. I'm here out of respect." Miles exhaled, impatient. "Mom, it's not about money. It's about control. Dad would have wanted transparency." I looked at him, really looked at him. His posture was too rigid, his tone too prepared. "You spoke to him today?" I asked. He blinked, startled. "What?" "The nurse said you were here when he collapsed. Were you with him?" A flicker, just one, in his eyes. "I was nearby. That's not the point." I didn't push further. Not then. The air in that hallway already felt wrong, like something vital had shifted, and I was the last to catch it. The lawyer, still performing civility, gently closed his briefcase. "We can follow up later this evening if you prefer, Mrs. Anderson. In the meantime, please take this." He slid a slim folder across the counter toward me. The hospital lights reflected off the top sheet in a dull shimmer. In bold black letters across the front, it read, "Temporary Injunction Petition." For a second, I didn't even breathe. The sounds around me dulled, the nurse's chatter, the squeak of shoes, the hum of machinery. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and uneven, pulsing against my ribs. I looked from the folder to my son. "What is this?" Miles shifted, glancing at Tanya. She didn't meet my eyes. "Just paperwork," he said quietly. "You'll understand later." He turned away before I could answer, as if grief had a schedule, and I was wasting his time. That's when I realized something that would haunt me for weeks. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was a performance, and I was the only one in the room who hadn't rehearsed my lines. Grief is the only silence people notice. Every voice at Timothy's burials sounded careful, measured, almost afraid to disturb it. The estate lawn was trimmed to perfection, the flower arrangements immaculate, orchids, white roses, lilies, everything Timothy would have liked. It was a private service, small and expensive, the kind of farewell money could organize, but love couldn't soften. Miles handled every arrangement without looking at me once. He stood a few feet away beside Tanya, his posture rigid, his suit flawless. People whispered that he was so strong for his mother. They didn't see the distance, that invisible wall between us, built from everything that had gone unsaid since the hospital. When the pastor finished, I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. My tears had already turned into confusion. How did we get from a dinner table to a grave in 2 days? Timothy's coffin was a rich mahogany, the same shade as his old office desk. I remember running my fingers along the wood and thinking he'd hate this weather. The wind was sharp, unseasonably cold for spring. I caught a glimpse of Tanya's hand tucked inside Miles's arm, her nails pale pink, manicured to perfection, and wondered how anyone could look so composed while burying family. People murmured condolences, hugged me, offered shallow comfort. I nodded, I thanked, I smiled, performing grief while my mind stayed elsewhere. By the time the service moved inside for the reception, I felt like I was walking underwater. The estate's grand hall had never felt so foreign. Every chandelier gleamed. Every tray was refilled with precision, every conversation hushed when I walked past. Grief had turned my home into a museum of polite sympathy. Miles took charge of greeting guests, thanking everyone for coming, assuring them the family was fine. Tanya stood beside him, touching his shoulder at all the right moments. I tried to meet his eyes once, just once, but he looked through me like I was part of the decor. That was the first time I truly realized my son wasn't grieving. He was performing. Halfway through the reception, I escaped to the side veranda for air. The sound of wind through the oaks felt more honest than the words floating around that hall. I closed my eyes, letting the cold settle on my face. That's when I overheard it. A voice just around the corner, soft but clear. Tanya said they argued again that night. A woman whispered. My eyes opened. About ownership. He wanted to take over, but Mr. Anderson said no. She continued, the tone hushed but careless. It was Tanya's cousin. Young, talkative, one of those people who mistake gossip for connection. Another woman shushed her quickly, but it was too late. Argued again that night. I gripped the railing. Timothy had argued with Miles before, sure, but lately it had been happening more often behind closed doors in clipped tones that always turned soft when I entered the room. He'd say, it's just business, but there was always something brittle in his voice when he said it. Now, that brittle tone echoed in my head. I turned back toward the hall, scanning faces. Tanya smiled at a group of executives, laughter rehearsed, posture perfect. Miles poured himself a drink, nodded at something someone said, and slipped into another conversation as if nothing in the world had shifted. Inside my chest, something did. I didn't say a word to either of them. Not yet. But I watched. Every gesture, every glance. It wasn't grief I saw. It was calculation. When most of the guests had left, I found myself sitting alone near the fireplace, staring into the dying flame. My reflection wavered in the glass, pale and still. I was trying to piece together a picture that didn't yet make sense. Timothy's cryptic warning, Miles's cold detachment, Tanya's composure. That's when I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned to see a familiar face at the doorway, Mr. Lowell, Timothy's personal lawyer. He took off his hat respectfully, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Anderson, he said quietly, I need a moment of your time. Privately, if possible. I nodded, pushing myself up from the chair. Of course. What is it? He looked toward the staircase to make sure no one was within earshot, then lowered his voice. It's about something your husband left behind. The words hung in the air, soft and heavy. For the first time all day, my heart didn't ache. It raced. The house was too quiet after the burial. I'd always loved silence, but this one was wrong, too thick, too alert, like it was waiting for me to hear something I didn't want to. Every tick of the grandfather clock sounded louder, and the smell of flowers from the parlor had already turned heavy, sweet to the point of nausea. When the doorbell rang that Monday morning, I almost ignored it. I thought it was another neighbor bringing casseroles or sympathy cards I couldn't read. But when I opened the door, it wasn't a neighbor. It was Mr. Lowell, Timothy's personal lawyer. The same man who'd handled every contract, every trust, every careful step of our life together. He looked smaller than I remembered, black coat damp from the rain, hat tucked respectfully under his arm. Mrs. Anderson, he said softly, I'm sorry to intrude. May I come in? I led him into Timothy's study. The room still smelled like him, cedar, leather, and faint traces of the cologne he wore to every meeting. His reading glasses sat on the desk where he'd left them Friday night. I hadn't had the heart to move them. Mr. Lowell set his briefcase down gently, taking a long breath before speaking. Your husband trusted me with many things, Mrs. Anderson, but he trusted you most. That's why he asked me to come today. I frowned, sitting across from him. To come for what? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. There were discrepancies in the company's internal accounts, significant ones. Timothy suspected that funds were being redirected from the primary logistics division into smaller shell vendors. Quietly, systematically. I blinked. Redirected by whom? His eyes met mine, cautious but firm. He believed your son might be involved. For a moment, the words didn't connect. I heard them, but they didn't land. I just stared at him, waiting for a correction, for him to say someone else, for this to be a misunderstanding. Mr. Lowell, I whispered, Miles may have made mistakes, but he wouldn't steal from his own father. He sighed. Timothy wasn't certain either. He hoped he was wrong, but he found forged authorizations under Miles's executive code and unusual transfers disguised as consulting fees. That's why he took precautionary measures. The transfer, I said slowly, to my account. He nodded. Exactly. It wasn't random. It was protection. He wanted the fortune secured in your name, so it couldn't vanish if the investigation reached the board. I felt my pulse in my throat. The memory of that dinner hit me all over again. The way Timothy's voice had softened, the weight in his eyes when he'd said, just to be safe. Mr. Lowell opened his briefcase and took out a long, sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. He left this for you, he said. He told me to deliver it only after his passing. His exact words were, if anything happens, she'll know when to open it. My hands trembled as I took it. The flap was still intact, Timothy's handwriting scrawled across the front. For Pamela. Only if I'm gone. The air felt too thin. I broke the seal carefully, unfolding a single sheet of paper inside. His handwriting, steady, deliberate, filled the page. Pam, if you're reading this, then the quiet I feared has arrived. I saw too much and said too little. I trusted where I shouldn't have, and now I need you to protect what we built. Don't let them rewrite the books. You were always the safe one. T. I read it twice, then a third time, until the words blurred into the page. When I finally looked up, Mr. Lowell was watching me gently. He wanted you to understand why he did what he did. He wasn't hiding from you. He was trying to give you control before someone else took it. My throat tightened. He thought Miles would betray him. He hoped he wouldn't. But hope, Mr. Lowell said quietly, doesn't close ledgers. The rain outside thickened against the windows, a slow percussion that filled the space between us. I folded the letter back into its envelope, hands steady now. Something inside me, some old frightened part, went very still. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew this much. Whatever Timothy had tried to prevent had already begun. And if he'd trusted me to keep it safe, I would. Grief has no timeline, but banks do. By Tuesday morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, polite voices, terms I half understood. Judicial hold, temporary injunction, probate inquiry. Each phrase felt like a stranger walking into my house and rearranging furniture I didn't invite them to touch. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding. Timothy had always been meticulous with documentation. Everything we owned was clean, traceable joint. But when the third call came from our private banker, I knew this wasn't confusion. It was strategy. Mrs. Anderson, the banker said cautiously, "I'm sorry, but a court order was filed yesterday morning. It places a temporary freeze on all joint and corporate accounts pending review." Review of what? I asked. She hesitated, her tone turning careful. "Your son, Mr. Miles Anderson, submitted a claim requesting oversight to ensure fiduciary integrity. Until the matter's clarified, we can't authorize withdrawals, transfers, or access beyond minimal personal expenses." My hand went cold around the phone. "He filed this? My son?" "Yes, ma'am." Less than 12 hours after the medical report was logged. 12 hours. He hadn't even let the death certificate dry. I thanked her mechanically, hung up, and sat in Timothy's study. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne, the faint citrus wood blend he always wore. But the scent that lingered now was sharper, the smell of betrayal, fresh and clean like paper ink. I called Mr. Lowell immediately. He arrived within the hour, coat still damp from the morning drizzle. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. "I saw the order," he said, placing a folder on the desk. Miles's attorney filed it under the pretense of protecting the estate's liquidity. It's clever he's presenting it as responsible stewardship, not aggression. "He's freezing me out," I said quietly. Lowell nodded once. "Essentially, yes. The accounts are frozen until we prove those transfers Timothy ordered were legitimate and voluntary." I looked at him. "We can do that, can't we?" Everything was signed, time-stamped, authenticated. He opened the folder, sliding over a series of printed confirmations. Every transaction was processed properly. The signatures match. The compliance officer signed off. Nothing is irregular. Then why the freeze? He leaned back slightly. "Because legality isn't the only weapon, Mrs. Anderson. Optics are. Your son's attorney understands that suspicion is often louder than truth." I rubbed my temples, exhaustion pressing behind my eyes. "So he's planting doubt." "Yes," Lowell said simply. "And until that doubt is resolved, everything you and Timothy built remains in limbo." I stared at the papers spread before me, numbers and signatures, all neatly aligned. Proof of Timothy's last decision. They should have felt like security, but instead they looked like fragments of a language I didn't speak anymore. Lowell's voice softened. "I've ordered certified records of every transaction Timothy made in the last week. I'll have them couriered from the bank directly. Once we establish the timeline, we can challenge the injunction." I nodded, though my mind was somewhere else, back at that dinner table, the sound of Timothy's voice when he said, "Just to be safe." He must have known something. He always did. "Lowell," I said after a long silence, "how long before this is over?" He sighed. "These things don't move quickly. Miles has already positioned himself as executor in waiting. The court will treat this delicately. He's family." I looked at the fireplace, the ashes still faint from the night before. So was Timothy. Lowell's expression hardened. "I'll handle the paperwork." "But Pamela," he paused, weighing his words, "the question we need to answer isn't just whether your husband signed those transfers. It's why he felt he needed to." His tone was different now, measured, investigative. "Why?" I echoed. He leaned forward, his voice low. "To understand what's happening, we have to know what happened that night. Everything. Who was in that office? Who made the last call? Who left first? Outside, rain began tapping softly against the windows, steady and unrelenting. I stared at the documents on the desk. Evidence of a man trying to protect something he knew was already under threat. I didn't know it yet, but that single question, what happened that night, would be the one that changed everything. The company's headquarters sat on the edge of downtown, 8 floors of glass and quiet ambition. I hadn't been there since the funeral, but as the elevator carried me up, I realized how much this building still smelled like Timothy. Coffee, printer ink, a faint trace of cedar polish. It was strange how the scent of a place could outlive the man who built it. Mr. Lowell had arranged for access to Timothy's office, citing personal property retrieval. The staff kept their distance, polite but uneasy. Everyone avoided eye contact, as though grief were contagious. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, I was met with that same heavy silence, the kind that doesn't feel respectful, just afraid. Timothy's office sat at the end of the corridor, its door closed, blinds half drawn. I hesitated before touching the handle. The plaque on the door still read Timothy W. Anderson, founder and CEO. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, a woman who looked more like a stranger than a widow. Inside, everything was just as he'd left it, the papers neatly stacked, his pen resting beside a half-empty glass of water. His chair was turned slightly away from the desk, facing the city. The light from the window cut across the carpet like a blade, illuminating the faint outline of where paramedics must have knelt. The custodian, an older man with kind eyes, lingered in the doorway. His name tag read Raphael. He'd been with the company for years. Timothy always called him the heartbeat of the building. "Mrs. Anderson," he said softly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I just needed to," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "Were you here the night I couldn't finish the sentence. Raphael nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I was on floor duty. Around 8:30, I was cleaning near the elevators when I heard voices. Loud ones. Mr. Anderson and Mr. Miles. They were arguing. I turned. You're sure it was my son?" He nodded again. He was shouting, said something like, "You're treating me like a child." Then I heard a crash, a glass breaking, maybe. A few minutes later, your husband's door opened. Mr. Miles came out fast, didn't say a word, just stormed past me toward the elevators. My stomach tightened, and my husband? Raphael's eyes dropped. I went in to check a few minutes later, but the door was closed again. I figured he needed space. I never imagined. His voice trailed off. I took a slow breath, scanning the desk. Everything looked untouched. No signs of chaos, just eerie order. "Did anyone else come that night?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Yes, Mrs. Tanya came by earlier, around 7:30, I think. She brought a small bag of takeout soup. Said she was dropping dinner for her father-in-law. Did she stay long?" "Not long. 10 minutes, maybe less. She left before Mr. Miles arrived." I felt the room tilt slightly. "Are you certain about the times?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Positive. The cameras would show it." Mr. Lowell stepped forward. "That's what we're here to confirm. Can you show us the access logs for that night?" Raphael led us to the small security office down the hall. The room was cramped, the hum of monitors filling the air. He keyed in a request, and within seconds, a list of electronic entries appeared on screen. Badges, timestamps locations. There, Raphael said, pointing. Mrs. Tanya Anderson, 7:34 p.m., East Entrance. Out at 7:43. Then his finger slid lower. Mr. Miles Anderson, first entry 8:19 p.m., exit 8:33. Then back in again at 8:48. Back in. I repeated. He nodded. Second entry 15 minutes later. No recorded exit time. Lowell leaned closer to the screen, brow furrowed. That means he re-entered and stayed until after your husband collapsed. I stared at the screen, at those small digital numbers that suddenly felt heavier than words. Timothy's entire last hour was now reduced to timestamps: 7:34, 8:19, 8:48, and none of them included me. What was he doing back in the building? I whispered. Raphael hesitated, lowering his voice. I don't know, ma'am. But when the alarm went off, he was the one who ran to the front desk and told us to call 911. The hum of the monitors filled the silence that followed. Lowell straightened, slowly glancing at me. We'll need copies of those logs. Raphael nodded. I'll print them for you. But if I may say, whatever this is, Mr. Timothy didn't deserve it. He was a good man. I swallowed hard. He was. As we left the office, I looked back one last time at Timothy's desk, the papers still perfectly stacked, the chair still turned toward the window. He'd always said the company would outlive him. Standing there, I realized someone had made sure of it, but not in the way he meant. Hospitals have a way of making truth sound like paperwork. Everything gets written down, edited, sanitized, until the facts don't feel human anymore. That's what I was thinking when Mr. Lowell and I sat in the small consultation office of County General, waiting for Nurse Becca Hollins. She'd been Timothy's assigned cardiac nurse for almost a year, the one who managed his post-stroke checkups and adjusted his medications. She entered quietly, hands folded, eyes darting between us. She looked tired, not the kind of tired that comes from night shifts, but the kind that comes from guilt. Thank you for meeting us. Lowell began gently. We just have a few questions about Mr. Anderson's charting in the days before his passing. Becca nodded stiffly. Of course. I wasn't sure what this was about. Lowell slid a copy of the dosage chart across the table. We noticed a discrepancy. The file shows two versions of the same record. One marked as a revision, time-stamped 2 hours after the original. Can you tell us why that is? Her fingers twitched slightly. It was an adjustment. I realized later that I'd entered the wrong dosage, so I corrected it. Lowell's tone stayed calm. Which dosage was wrong, the first or the second? Her eyes flicked up briefly, then away. The first. Then why? Lowell asked. Did the supervising physician never sign off on the correction? Becca froze. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the hum of the ceiling light. I wasn't told to, she said, finally, voice barely audible. By whom? Lowell pressed. Her answer came like an exhale she'd been holding for days. Mrs. Tanya Anderson called me that night. She said Mr. Anderson had been feeling off, dizzy, restless. She asked me to review his chart remotely and fix any inconsistencies before the doctor noticed. She said she didn't want him embarrassed over another forgotten pill. I leaned forward slowly. She asked you to change a medical record? She said it was just correcting an entry. Becca said quickly, panic rising in her voice. I didn't think. She's family. She said she was calling from his office. I thought she was helping. Lowell opened a thin folder and pulled out another sheet of paper. And this payment, he said evenly, does that look familiar? Her face drained of color. Where did you get that? It's a disbursement from a corporate subaccount, he said, tapping the header. $40,000 processed 3 days before the revision, labeled consulting services. The recipient name, Rebecca Hollins. She swallowed hard. That wasn't from them. It came through a third-party vendor. I thought it was a bonus. Did you sign a consulting agreement? No, her voice cracked. I didn't ask questions. I felt my nails press into my palms. Every word coming out of her mouth made the room feel smaller. My husband's trust had been rewritten like an invoice, just another document someone decided to edit. Lowell stayed composed, though his jaw tightened. Mrs. Hollins, do you understand the gravity of altering dosage notes on a patient who died 48 hours later? Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. She said it was harmless. Lowell gathered the papers neatly. I believe you didn't understand at the time, but now you'll need to cooperate. I'll be filing an affidavit to reopen the case as undetermined cause of death. You'll likely be contacted for questioning. Becca looked at me, then, her face pale and trembling. Mrs. Anderson, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. For the first time, I felt no sympathy, just a deep, cold stillness. You didn't just hurt someone, I said quietly. You helped erase him. Lowell rose, tucking the file into his briefcase. We'll handle the rest, Pamela. But the pieces are starting to align. The payment, the revision, the timing, all of it points to coordination. I stood slowly smoothing my coat, and coordination requires intent. He gave a small nod. Yes, and intent changes everything. As we walked back through the sterile corridor, the lights above buzzed faintly, flickering just enough to make the shadows dance. I felt something shift in me. Not grief, not even anger. Something sharper. By the time we reached the lobby, Lowell's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then at me. I'll file for the death certificate to be reviewed, he said quietly. By the end of the day, it will no longer say cardiac arrest. It will say undetermined. And just like that, the story of Timothy's death stopped being finished. It had been reopened. The day after the nurse's confession, I walked into Timothy's study alone. The curtains were half drawn, sunlight spilling through in long, uneven lines across the carpet. The room was exactly as it had been since the funeral, his pen still on the blotter, the photo of us in Tuscany still sitting beside the desk lamp, our smiles frozen in another lifetime. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe closure, maybe a trace of him I hadn't already buried. But something about the nurse's story kept replaying in my mind. Tanya's call, the word harmless, the $40,000 consulting payment. Timothy had been careful with everything he touched, especially his medicine. If someone tampered with it, there had to be a sign. I sat in his chair and let my eyes drift across the desk. His daily pill organizer sat open, half empty. Every bottle had its label facing outward. He was that kind of man. On the far left, near his drawer, I noticed something faint. A small scratch on the wood, barely visible unless the light caught it. I pulled the drawer open, empty, but when I felt along the inner panel, my fingers brushed against a ridge. There was a false bottom, My pulse quickened. I slid a letter opener under the edge and lifted gently. Beneath the panel lay a single item wrapped in tissue paper. I unfolded it carefully and froze. A small brown glass vial. The label read Naturise, Herbal Rest Formula, the kind of supplement Timothy would have dismissed as nonsense. I turned it over in my hand. The liquid inside caught the light, faintly amber. There was only a third of it left. Lowell arrived an hour later. When I showed him the vial, his brows drew together in a way I hadn't seen before. "Where did you find this?" "In his desk," I said quietly. "Hidden." It was labeled as a supplement, but he never used herbal anything. You know that. He examined it under the lamp. No prescription barcode. No distributor address. "It looks homemade," I said. Lowell nodded slowly. "And conveniently forgotten." I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen down the hall, the kind of ordinary sound that feels intrusive when everything else has stopped making sense. What if this was what made him collapse? I asked. "That's not something we can guess," Lowell replied. "We'll confirm it." "I know someone," I said quickly. "An old college friend, Celia. She's a pharmacist over at Lakeview Labs. I can ask her to check what's inside, discreetly." Lowell looked at me, weighing it. "Do it today. Quietly. No one else needs to know yet." Celia agreed to meet within the hour. When I walked into her small office, she raised an eyebrow at the vial. "You sure you want me to test this? Looks more like a boutique blend than something regulated." "Just tell me what's in it," I said. She unscrewed the cap carefully, dipped a thin glass rod into the liquid, and placed a single drop on a strip of reagent paper. The color shifted slowly, from pale yellow to deep red. Celia's face changed instantly. "This isn't herbal," she murmured. "It's a sedative compound, something close to chloral hydrate. If someone with high blood pressure or cardiac meds took this regularly, it could cause arrhythmia or worse." I gripped the edge of her desk. "Worse how?" She met my eyes. "Heart failure, but it would look like natural cardiac arrest." The room went silent. Even the hum of her computer felt distant. Celia capped the vial and slid it back across the table. "Where did you get this?" I hesitated. "It belonged to Timothy." Her expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry, Pam." Whoever gave it to him knew exactly what they were doing. By the time I returned home, my hands were shaking. Lowell was waiting on the porch, coat collar turned up against the wind. I handed him the vial and the note from Celia. He scanned it quickly, his jaw tightening. "She's certain?" "Yes." He exhaled, slow and controlled. Then he looked up at me. "We test it," he said quietly, "but we tell no one yet. Not the police, not the court, not even your son. Not until the report is irrefutable." The way he said it, measured, deliberate, made my skin prickle, because this wasn't just proof anymore. It was ammunition. And once we used it, there'd be no going back. Courtrooms have a way of stripping people bare. You can wear your best clothes, perfect your tone, rehearse your story, but under those fluorescent lights, truth, or the lack of it, shows through every pause. I sat in the front row beside Mr. Lowell, hands folded, eyes forward. Across the aisle, Miles adjusted his tie. Expression calm. Too calm. Tanya sat next to him, her face painted in that practiced sympathy, the kind that photographs well but feels hollow in person. The bailiff called the case, and the sound of wooden chairs scraping against the floor filled the silence. This wasn't a criminal hearing, not yet. This was a civil matter, the petition to maintain the financial freeze. But everyone in that room knew it was more than numbers. It was the first real battle for what Timothy had left behind, and for his truth. Miles's lawyer rose first, tall, slick, his voice polished like he'd practiced every inflection. "Your Honor," he began, "we acknowledge the tragedy of Mr. Anderson's passing. But what we question is the timing and legitimacy of the full transfer of assets to Mrs. Pamela Anderson, executed less than 48 hours before his death." He let that hang in the air like a stain that wouldn't fade. "She claims the transfer was requested by her husband, yet we have no witnesses to corroborate this, no medical clearance confirming he was of sound mind, no board consent for the business holdings. It is frankly unusual." Lowell stood slowly, calm as a tide coming in. Unusual does not mean unlawful. The transfers were authorized by Mr. Anderson himself, digitally and notarized in compliance with the bank's protocols. Every timestamp matches his location data. I have those records here. He handed a file to the clerk. The lawyer barely glanced at it before continuing. "Even if those are authentic, coercion cannot be ruled out. Grief can cloud judgment, but guilt can, too." I looked straight at Miles. He avoided my eyes. Mrs. Anderson had complete access to her husband's private office. The lawyer continued, pacing smoothly. She stood to gain full control of a $25 million estate. Given her husband's recent health struggles, it's not implausible to suggest emotional manipulation. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have evidence of coercion, counselor?" He smiled faintly. "Not yet, but the speed of these transactions and the secrecy surrounding them raise serious doubts about intent." Lowell didn't even flinch. "Your Honor, these accusations insult the integrity of a man who built his legacy on precision. Mr. Anderson wasn't coerced. He was cautious, and if the opposing counsel doubts his soundness of mind, they might consider why Mr. Anderson's son, who stood to inherit, filed an injunction less than 12 hours after the death certificate was signed." A ripple went through the courtroom. I watched Miles's jaw tighten. Tanya's hand slid over his, a little too quickly. Lowell continued, voice steady. "We have notarized instructions, signed, witnessed, timestamped, directing all holdings to Mrs. Anderson's account. Furthermore, Mr. Anderson's personal attorney, myself, verified those instructions on record before his death. We can provide logs from the bank's internal system confirming both the digital authorization and physical signature." The judge nodded, flipping through the first few pages. "That's compelling, counselor, but I'll reserve judgment until we review the documentation fully." Miles's lawyer pressed again, softer now. "Your Honor, we're not contesting sentiment. We're contesting control. The Anderson estate employs over 100 people. An unverified transfer jeopardizes livelihoods. We simply ask the court to preserve stability while we assess whether this transaction reflects Mr. Anderson's true intent." The judge leaned back. "You're asking for a freeze on the basis of possibility, not proof. That's not stability, that's speculation." Lowell didn't smile, but I saw the smallest flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly. "Your Honor," I said, voice calm but deliberate, "my husband's intent wasn't about control. It was about protection. He discovered discrepancies in his company's finances. money being rerouted under false names. He asked me to move everything to keep it safe. Those were his words, keep it safe. I did exactly that. Tanya shifted beside Miles. Her fingers trembled slightly against the edge of her clutch. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. For the next hour, the lawyers traded statements, paper, policy, proof. I didn't hear most of it. My focus stayed on Tanya's hands. Perfectly manicured, pale pink polish. They trembled when Lowell mentioned forged consulting invoices. They trembled again when he cited medical record revisions under family instruction. The judge adjourned for recess, announcing a review of the bank logs before any decision. The courtroom filled with murmurs, lawyers collecting papers, voices overlapping. That's when Lowell's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced down, eyes narrowing at the message on his screen. Then he looked at me. The lab results just came in, he said quietly. The noise of the room faded. I could only hear those words, steady and sharp, slicing through the air like a gavel. Justice doesn't always begin with sirens. Sometimes it starts in whispers, cold, methodical, and quiet enough to sound like mercy. When Mr. Lowell called me the next morning, his voice had that still tone I'd come to recognize. Something big had shifted. They found at Pamela, he said simply, the sedative. It was in his system. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone pressed to my ear. You're sure? The toxicology report confirms it. The same compound from the vial, chloral derivative, mixed with traces of his hypertension medication. Lethal combination. The lab timestamp matches the day he collapsed. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry, my chest tight. Timothy's last 2 days played in my head like a cruel loop. His laugh over dinner, the soft way he'd said keep it safe, the warmth in his hand before it went cold. What happens now? I finally asked. Lowell exhaled. Now it moves from civil to criminal, but we need to tread carefully. The report was flagged by the county coroner, not the hospital, which means someone already suspects the original medical notes were falsified. I frowned. The nurse. He hesitated. That, and whoever ordered the edits. Within 48 hours, the county investigation reopened under the official classification death undetermined. 2 plainclothes detectives showed up at my home that Thursday afternoon. They were polite but thorough, Detective Moreno and her partner, Halpern. They spoke in soft tones, asked for copies of Timothy's prescriptions, his daily schedule, the contents of the vial. They didn't need prompting. Lowell had already supplied everything. We'll be re-interviewing the hospital staff, Moreno said as she closed her notepad. Just routine follow-up. But it wasn't routine. I knew that tone. The kind that says we already know something. We're just waiting for confirmation. That confirmation came faster than any of us expected. By Friday morning, Lowell called again. She cracked. He said, "Who?" "The nurse." Detectives met with her at the precinct last night. She confessed everything. Tanya contacted her 2 days before Timothy's collapse, asked for dosage corrections and private follow-up entries. She received $40,000 for her compliance. I closed my eyes. And Miles? Lowell's pause was long enough to answer me. He authorized the transfer through a shell vendor. It came from one of the company's corporate sub-accounts. The room went still. My mind tried to make sense of it all, but the reality settled like fog, thick and inescapable. My son had orchestrated it, and Tanya had carried it through. Did the nurse say why? I whispered. She said Miles told her it was to help his father rest easier before the transition. Lowell's voice hardened. He made it sound humane. I felt my stomach turn. Rest easier. The words echoed like mockery. Timothy hadn't been resting. He'd been fighting for the company, for the family, for me. Lowell continued. The detectives verified the payment trail. Each transfer lined up with dates from the falsified logs. It's airtight. What happens next? Warrants, he said flatly, for both Miles and Tanya. The DA's office is filing as we speak. They'll keep it quiet until they're served. No media, no leaks. Just quiet justice. Quiet justice. The phrase lingered in my mind long after we hung up. I looked around Timothy's study, at the books he'd collected, the framed certificate from the year he built his first branch, the faint impression his pen had left on the desk. Everything he built had been out of faith, in people, in work, in family, and that faith had been poisoned from within. As evening fell, I sat by the window, the rain streaking down the glass, soft and relentless. Somewhere across town, detectives were likely reviewing footage, collecting signatures, finalizing what would come next. But in this house, all I could hear was the slow tick of the clock, the same clock that had ticked through our last dinner. When Lowell stopped by later to drop off copies of the toxicology report, he stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. You should prepare yourself, Pamela. Once they move, it'll happen fast. This kind of case, once the money trail is clear, it's done. I nodded, though my hands trembled. I'm ready. He glanced at the sealed folder on my coffee table. Keep that report safe. It's the line between doubt and truth. I looked down at the folder, the proof of everything they'd done, and felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind of calm that only comes when the storm is finally about to break. As Lowell turned to leave, his phone buzzed once. He glanced at the message, then looked back at me. That was Moreno, he said. The DA signed off. On what? He met my eyes. Arrest warrants. The rain outside didn't stop. It only got louder. Justice came quietly. No sirens, no flashing lights, just the sound of tires rolling over wet pavement outside my house. I'd spent that morning sitting in Timothy's old chair, a pen in my hand, signing deposition papers that made my stomach turn. Words like fraudulent transfers, involuntary manslaughter, evidence tampering. They didn't look real on paper, but they were the only language left for what had been done. By the time Mr. Lowell arrived, the detectives were already en route to execute the warrants. He didn't have to tell me. I could see it in the way he adjusted his coat, the way he said my name softly. Pamela, they're being picked up? I asked. He nodded. Both of them. Different locations. Miles at the corporate office. Tanya at their home. I gripped the edge of the table. The rain outside was steady again, the same rhythm it had the night Timothy died. Lowell placed the signed deposition folder beside me. You've done what you needed to. You've honored his intent. I wanted to believe him, but the word honor felt wrong. There was no honor in this. Just truth, cold, heavy truth that didn't feel like victory. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A short message from Detective Moreno. In custody. I stared at those two words until they blurred. News traveled fast through quiet channels. By evening, the courthouse was surrounded by whispers. Law clerks, security staff, even junior attorneys pretending not to listen. Lowell had arranged for me to be kept out of the media line, but I saw it anyway later that night on a muted TV in his office. Miles being led out of the building, jaw tight, eyes forward. Tanya followed a few steps behind, her head down, a jacket draped over her shoulders. Her expression wasn't fear. It was something smaller. Shame trying to disguise itself as composure. Are they saying anything? I asked. Lowell shook his head. Miles hasn't spoken since they read the charges. But Tanya, he hesitated, flipping through his notes. She's talking. The word hit me like a gust of cold air. Talking. She claims she didn't know it would kill him. Her statement reads, he said it would just calm him down. I swallowed hard. She said he? Yes. She's naming Miles as the one who obtained the compound and directed the nurse. The room went silent. I tried to picture my son, his hands, the way he'd looked at me in that hospital hallway when he mentioned the accounts. The indifference in his eyes then made more sense now. He hadn't been grieving. He'd been planning. Lowell continued quietly. Her cooperation will reduce her sentencing recommendation, but it seals his. I didn't ask for the details, but he gave them anyway. Matter of fact, clinical, as lawyers do. 18 years for Miles. Fraud and manslaughter. 15 for Tanya, tampering and bribery. The DA's office is finalizing it now. They'll stand before the judge by Monday. 18 years. My son. I wanted to feel anger, satisfaction, something sharp enough to match what they'd done. But all I felt was hollow, the kind of emptiness that hums under your ribs. Lowell placed a fresh set of documents in front of me. These are your closing affidavits. It confirms the estate assets remain in your name, unchallenged. I signed each page slowly, my hands trembling just enough to blur my signature. When it was done, I leaned back, staring at the ink drying. He wanted protection. I murmured, not revenge. Lowell nodded gently. And protection is exactly what you've given him. You stopped them from rewriting his story. I looked toward the window. Outside, the rain had turned to mist, a faint veil over the city lights. Somewhere downtown, my son was sitting in a holding cell. I imagined him quiet, staring at the wall, realizing too late that all his father ever asked for was integrity. Lowell gathered the papers, closing his briefcase. I'll be in court Monday morning. You don't have to attend. I'll be there, I said softly. He deserves at least one parent who shows up. It wasn't forgiveness I carried into that courtroom. It was proof that love doesn't die just because people do. He didn't argue. He just nodded and left me with the sound of the clock ticking, steady, impartial, unfeeling. When I finally stood, the house felt different. Lighter, maybe, or just emptied of the lies that had lived in it for too long. Justice hadn't come loudly. It had come quietly, deliberately, like Timothy would have wanted it. But even quiet justice leaves an echo. The morning air carried that crisp stillness only spring after rain can bring, fresh but heavy with memory. The Anderson estate hadn't felt alive since Timothy's death, but that day it finally breathed again. The long mahogany table in the study gleamed beneath the chandelier. It had once been the stage for board meetings, family announcements, laughter over company milestones. Today it was for something quieter, closure. Only a few people were present. Mr. Lowell, the senior partners from the firm, and 3 longtime employees Timothy had trusted like family. No cameras, no press, no pretense. just the truth laid bare in legal language. Lowell adjusted his glasses, his voice low but firm. This is the final reading of the amended trust clause executed 3 days before Mr. Anderson's passing. Per his directive, all assets transferred to Mrs. Pamela Anderson stand as legally binding and irrevocable. The court recognizes her as sole executor and beneficiary of the estate. The words fell heavy into the quiet. Papers rustled. Pens clicked. Even the sound of breathing seemed deliberate. I sat at the head of the table, the same seat Timothy had occupied for decades. The leather was cool against my back, grounding. I'd spent the last 2 weeks buried in restitution work, verifying accounts, auditing transfers, contacting every employee who'd stayed loyal through the chaos. The company wasn't just surviving, it was rebuilding. Lowell continued. Additionally, per your authorization, Mrs. Anderson, all remaining business accounts connected to the misappropriated consulting fund have been dissolved. The assets recovered total approximately $1.4 million. The firm will transfer those funds to the estate maintenance account this week. I nodded, quietly thankful that the damage hadn't swallowed more. And the employees? Lowell smiled faintly. All reinstated as of this morning. Salaries restored, back pay scheduled. You've made quite a few people sleep easier last night. That made me exhale for the first time in what felt like months. Timothy believed a company is only as strong as the people holding it up. I said softly, it's time they know he was right. Beside Lowell, one of the senior accountants, a gentle man named Curtis who'd been with Timothy since the beginning, cleared his throat. Mrs. Anderson, he said, voice trembling slightly, on behalf of the staff, we just want to say thank you for not letting the story end the wrong way. I smiled faintly. The story isn't over. It's just honest again. Curtis nodded, eyes damp. The meeting went on for another hour, every document signed, every ledger balanced. When it was done, the others excused themselves, leaving just Lowell and me in the study. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was still peaceful, like the house had been waiting for this moment to exhale. Lowell closed his folder and looked at me. You've handled this with more grace than most people could. I gave a small laugh that didn't quite reach my eyes. Grace has nothing to do with it. I just didn't want Timothy's name rewritten by people who didn't deserve it. He nodded. You succeeded. I stood, walking slowly around the table. My hand brushed the edge of the chair at the far end. The one Miles had always claimed during family meetings, back when he still called his father Dad, and not the man who doesn't understand succession. The leather was untouched, pristine, the chair still pulled slightly away from the table, like he'd left it waiting. For a long moment, I stared at it. That chair had once symbolized continuity, legacy. Now it was just an empty seat, proof that greed had no place in inheritance. Lowell began packing his briefcase, but I spoke before he could close it. He told me to keep it safe. I said quietly, my eyes still on the chair. Now you see why. Lowell looked at me, his expression soft but solemn. He chose well. I ran my fingers along the polished surface of the table one last time, feeling the faint ridges of years of work etched into the wood. Timothy's work, our work. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the floor. The room felt lighter, not just because justice had been done, but because order had been restored. One signature, one truth, one reckoning at a time. As Lowell left, I stayed behind, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade down the hall. Then I turned to the empty chair again, the one my son used to fill, and whispered so softly even the walls had to strain to hear. "Safe, Timothy, just like you asked." The house had never known peace like this. Not the kind that comes after laughter or celebration, but the kind that lingers after chaos burns itself out. Months had passed since the hearing, since the last paper was signed, since the final verdict turned Timothy's warnings into truth. Yet the quiet still felt strange, like stepping into a life that remembered too much. That evening, I sat at the same table where everything had started. The soft hum of the grandfather clock filled the silence, its rhythm slow and steady, a reminder that time moves on whether hearts do or not. The dining room hadn't changed, still polished wood, still the faint scent of lemon oil, still the two candlesticks that had witnessed every argument and every apology. On the table before me sat three things: a half-full glass of wine, Timothy's gold cufflinks, and the wristwatch Mr. Lowell had returned earlier that afternoon. It ticked softly, the sound threading through the stillness like a heartbeat. Lowell had stopped by to drop off the final discharge papers, the kind that meant every case, every claim, every question was now officially closed. He'd stood in the doorway, coat draped over one arm, his tone gentle, as always. "It's done, Pamela," he said. "Everything tied, everything cleared. The estate stands untouched. No more hearings." He'd placed the cufflinks on the table beside the papers, then smiled faintly. He wore them to every meeting, said they made him remember where he started. I'd smiled back. He earned that reminder. When he left, the house felt too big again, too quiet, but I didn't mind it this time. I'd learned that quiet wasn't emptiness. It was recovery. I traced a finger along the rim of my glass, the sound of faint hum against the ticking of the watch. My reflection in the wine surface looked older, calmer. The grief hadn't gone. It had just learned to sit beside me instead of across from me. I thought of Miles, not the man in handcuffs, not the son in headlines, but the boy who used to build Lego skyscrapers in this same room while Timothy pretended to negotiate mergers with him over juice boxes. I still saw that child sometimes, especially in dreams, before everything went wrong. They called me brave for standing through the storm, but I didn't feel brave. I felt necessary. Justice hadn't made me happy. It had made me steady. I stood and walked to the cabinet, pulling down one of Timothy's old tumblers. The glass caught the light the same way it had that night, the night he'd looked across this very table and said the words that changed everything. "Pam, I need you to transfer everything to your account, just to be safe." At the time, it sounded like paranoia. Now I knew it was prophecy. I poured a small splash of wine into the tumbler and set it across from me where he used to sit. The chair creaked slightly, like the memory of him shifting in it. "I did what you asked." I whispered. I kept it safe. Outside, the last of the evening light spilled through the windows, painting the room gold. Somewhere, a bird sang once and went silent again. I picked up the watch, the metal cool against my palm. The second hand moved in perfect rhythm, steady, unwavering. It was still keeping time, even when everything else had stopped. I slipped it onto my wrist. It fit perfectly. As I sat back down, I looked around the room where trust had turned into legacy, where loss had turned into proof. The air felt full again, not with ghosts, but with peace earned inch by inch. At the far end of the table, the empty chair caught a slant of sunlight, and for a fleeting second, it almost looked like he was sitting there, calm, knowing, proud. I smiled. The clock struck 8. The house stayed still. And for the first time since that night, I didn't feel alone at the table.